The alarm cut through the steel corridor before I even reached the containment door, and my hand was already on my weapon before my mind caught up with what was happening. Red light pulsed against the walls. Somewhere behind that reinforced door, something was screaming, and it was not a sound I expected to ever hear from her. My name is Daniel Cross, and 3 weeks earlier, I had been told to guard the most dangerous prisoner humanity had ever taken. Nobody warned me that guarding her would change everything I believed about the war, about the enemy, and about myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how it started. The ceasefire with the Vral hegemony had been signed 4 months before I arrived at the facility. The war had lasted 11 years, and it ended not with a victory parade, but with an exhausted silence. Both sides had bled enough. Both sides wanted it to stop. I had served through the last 3 years of that war, first as a rifleman, then as part of a specialized unit trained to handle Vral technology and Vral prisoners. That training was the only reason I was chosen for what came next. They called the facility Site Ashcroft, though nobody ever explained why. It sat underground, 40 meters below a stretch of dry hills that looked like nothing from the surface. Inside, it was a maze of gray corridors, reinforced doors, and rooms built to hold things that were never meant to be held. I was assigned there under Colonel Grace Whitfield, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that never rose above a calm, controlled tone, even when she was giving orders that could end a life. She met me on my first day in a briefing room with no windows and only one chair, which she did not offer me. "You have been selected for a special assignment," she said. "You will be assigned to guard Asset Zero. You will not discuss this assignment with anyone outside this facility. You will not attempt to communicate with the asset beyond basic operational necessity. Do you understand?" I told her I understood, though I had no idea what Asset Zero actually was. Nobody had told me. When I asked, Colonel Whitfield only said 4 words that I would remember for the rest of my life. "You will see soon." I saw soon enough. 2 guards led me down 3 levels, past checkpoints that required both a keycard and a retinal scan, until we reached a chamber unlike anything else in the facility. The walls were thicker here, lined with a strange metal alloy that hummed faintly, like it was alive. At the center of the room, behind a wall of reinforced glass, sat the Vral Queen Mother. I had seen Vral soldiers before, out on the battlefield, moving fast and fighting with a discipline that made them terrifying opponents. But nothing prepared me for her. She was tall, taller than any Vral I had encountered, with a long, elegant frame covered in deep violet skin that shimmered faintly under the harsh light. Her eyes were large, dark, and far too intelligent for comfort. Thin restraints wrapped around her wrists and ankles, connected to the floor, though I quickly understood those restraints were more symbolic than functional. If she wanted to break free, she likely could have. She did not move when I entered. She did not even look at me at first. She simply sat there, perfectly still, watching the far wall as if I did not exist. "This is your post," said the guard beside me, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus Webb, who had clearly done this job far longer than I had. "You watch her. You report anything unusual. You do not talk to her. You do not feed her by hand. You do not get close to the glass. Understood?" I nodded, though something about the whole situation felt wrong. Here was the most valuable prisoner of the entire war, the leader of an entire Vral hive network, sitting alone in a room with nothing but silence for company. No interrogation, no negotiation, just quiet, endless observation. Marcus left an hour later, and for the first time, I was alone with her. I stood at my post near the door, weapon lowered but ready, watching the Queen through the reinforced glass. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, her head turned toward me, and those large dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She did not speak. She did not need to. In that single look, I understood that whatever she was, whatever secrets she carried, she was far more aware of her situation than anyone in this facility believed. The first days blurred together in routine. I would arrive at my shift, take my position by the door, and watch her for hours at a time. She rarely moved. She ate only when food was placed close enough, and even then, she seemed to eat only small amounts, as if she was conserving something. She never spoke, not once, though I began to notice something strange. Her lips moved sometimes, almost imperceptibly, forming words in a language I did not understand, as if she was speaking to someone who was not there. I reported this to Colonel Whitfield during my third shift. She listened without expression, then told me to continue monitoring and to note any change in behavior. Command believes the asset may be attempting to communicate psychologically with distant Vral forces, she explained. We do not yet understand the full extent of Vral hive communication. Your observations matter more than you realize. That night, something happened that I still cannot fully explain. The facility lost power for exactly 4 seconds. It was a minor fluctuation, likely caused by one of the older generators cycling, the kind of thing that happened once or twice a week without much concern. But in those 4 seconds of darkness, before the emergency lights kicked in, I heard something from behind the glass that I will never forget, a sound of pure fear. Not anger, not aggression, fear. When the lights returned, the Queen was pressed against the far corner of her cell, her long limbs curled protectively around her midsection, her eyes wide and darting toward the door as if she expected something terrible to walk through it. For the first time since I had arrived, she looked at me not as an enemy studying a captor, but as someone silently pleading for help. Then, just as quickly, she composed herself. Her posture straightened. Her expression returned to that same unreadable stillness I had grown used to. It was as if the fear had never happened at all. But I had seen it, and I could not stop thinking about it. I did not report that moment to Colonel Whitfield. I told myself it was because the power fluctuation was already logged automatically by the system, so there was nothing new to add. But the truth was simpler than that. Something about the way she had reacted told me this was not the behavior of a captured enemy leader waiting to be executed or exchanged. It was the behavior of someone terrified of something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with me, or with the humans holding her, or with the facility itself. Whatever she was afraid of, it was not us. Over the following days, I found myself watching her more closely, not out of suspicion, but out of a growing curiosity I could not fully explain. She began to notice me watching her differently too. Sometimes, when I looked up, her eyes would already be on me, studying me the same way I studied her, as if she was trying to decide whether I was someone worth trusting. I did not know it then, but that quiet exchange of glances was the beginning of something that would change the course of everything that followed. Something far bigger than either of us understood at the time. Because the woman behind that glass was not simply a prisoner, she was not simply a weapon to be contained, as Command believed. She was hiding something, something so important that she had chosen silence over speech, stillness over resistance, and fear over pride. And soon, I would be the only person in the entire facility who would learn what that secret truly was. That night, as I walked back to my quarters, through the long gray corridors of Site Ashcroft, I could not shake the image of her curled protectively in the corner of her cell. Soldiers do not act that way. Enemy commanders do not act that way. Whatever she was protecting in that moment was something she valued more than her own safety, more than her pride, more than the war itself. I lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling of my small quarters, replaying those 4 seconds of darkness over and over in my mind. Somewhere beneath the surface of this cold, secretive facility, a story was unfolding that nobody outside that containment room understood, and for reasons I could not yet explain, I felt a strange, quiet pull to be the one who uncovered it. I did not know then how close I already was to the truth. I did not know that the fear I witnessed that night was only the smallest fragment of a much larger secret, one that would force me to choose between my orders and something far more important. All I knew was that the Vral Queen Mother was afraid, and whatever she feared was still out there, somewhere beyond the walls of Site Ashcroft, waiting. 3 weeks passed before I broke the first rule Colonel Whitfield had given me, and I still remember the exact moment I decided it was worth the risk. By then, my shifts had become a strange kind of ritual. I would walk into the containment chamber, take my position by the door, and spend hours in silence with a being that command insisted was a weapon, not a person. But the longer I watched her, the less I believed that description fit what I was seeing. Her name, I eventually learned, was Isira. I did not find this out through any official file. I found it because one night, during another one of those brief power fluctuations that seemed to happen more often than the engineers could explain, she whispered it to herself, so quietly I almost missed it. I repeated it back to her the next day, carefully, uncertain whether I was allowed to speak at all. "Isira," I said. Her head turned sharply toward me, eyes wide with something between surprise and alarm. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then, slowly, she nodded, just once, as if confirming that I had heard correctly and that this small exchange meant something to her. That single nod was the beginning of everything. Over the following days, I noticed small inconsistencies in her behavior, things that did not match the profile command had given me of a proud, defiant enemy commander refusing to cooperate out of loyalty to her cause. She refused food unless it had been tested first, watching carefully as the nutrient packs were opened in front of her before she would touch them. At first I assumed this was simple distrust of her captors, but then I noticed she reacted the same way even when Colonel Whitfield herself brought the food, someone Isira had no reason to trust more than anyone else in the facility. It was not humans she feared, it was the food itself, or something that could be hidden inside it. She also flinched at certain sounds, specific tones that came from the facility's internal communication system, a high-pitched frequency used to signal shift changes. Most people would not even notice it. I only caught it because I had spent so many hours in that silent room that even the smallest details became impossible to ignore. And then there was the way she spoke, when she finally did begin speaking. It happened slowly, one broken word at a time, fragments of standard mixed with her own language, spoken so quietly I had to lean closer to the glass just to hear her. She never spoke when other guards were present. Only when it was me, and only when she seemed certain nobody else was listening through the monitoring systems, which I later learned had a small blind spot near the far corner of her cell, a flaw in the original construction that nobody outside the engineering team knew about. "You are different than the others," she said to me one night, her voice low and careful. "You watch, but you do not judge." I told her I was simply doing my job. She studied me for a long moment before responding. "Your job is to guard a weapon," she said. "But I am not a weapon. I never was." I should have reported that conversation immediately. Instead, I found myself asking her a question I had wanted to ask since the first night I saw her afraid in the dark. "What frightened you?" I asked. "During the power failure. It was not us." I could see that. Her expression shifted, something like grief passing briefly across her violet features, before she composed herself again. "You would not understand yet," she said, "and even if I told you, you would not believe me." "Try me," I said. She did not answer that night, but something in the way she looked at me told me she was considering it, weighing whether trusting a human guard was worth whatever risk it carried. I left that night with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that everything Command believed about her capture was wrong. The official story, the one repeated in every briefing and every classified report I had access to, was simple. Isira had been captured during the final battle of the war, cornered by human forces after a Vral retreat went wrong, taken as the ultimate prize to end the conflict on favorable terms. It painted her as a defeated leader, forced into captivity against her will, biding her time until rescue or revenge. But nothing about her behavior matched that story. A defeated leader does not refuse food out of caution rather than defiance. A defeated leader does not flinch at communication frequencies as if expecting a hidden signal. A defeated leader does not speak with careful, deliberate trust to the one guard who treats her with basic decency, while remaining silent and guarded around everyone else. I began to suspect something that felt almost impossible to believe. What if she had not been captured at all? What if, somehow, she had allowed herself to be taken? I brought this theory to nobody, not at first. I knew how it would sound, a lowly guard, questioning years of military intelligence and strategic analysis based on nothing more than a feeling. So instead, I kept watching, kept listening, and kept slowly earning whatever fragile trust Isira was willing to offer. It was during the 4th week that things around the facility began to shift in ways that had nothing to do with her. Marcus Webb, the guard who had first introduced me to my post, started acting strangely. He grew quiet during shift changes, avoided eye contact, and once, I caught him standing outside the containment chamber long after his shift had ended, simply staring at the door as if trying to decide whether to go inside. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off, saying he had simply lost track of time. But I did not believe him. Other guards whispered about something called asset instability, a phrase that appeared in hallway conversations and hushed briefings I was not meant to overhear. Nobody explained what it meant. When I asked Colonel Whitfield directly, she gave me a careful, practiced answer. There are concerns about long-term containment effects, she said. Nothing that concerns your duties directly. I did not believe that either. Then came the reports of unusual activity in the outer system, fragments of conversation I picked up from officers passing through the facility's upper levels. A second Vral vessel had been detected on the edge of long-range sensors, moving in a pattern that suggested it was not simply patrolling, but searching. Searching for something, or someone. I put the pieces together, slowly, carefully, the way you assemble a puzzle when you are not entirely sure what the final picture is supposed to look like. A Vral leader who did not behave like a captured prisoner. A ship lingering just beyond detection range, unwilling to approach directly, yet unwilling to leave. A growing unease among the guards who were closest to her, as if something about proximity to Isira changed people in ways they could not quite explain. I brought my suspicions to her directly one night, choosing my words carefully, aware that whatever answer she gave could change everything. "That ship out there," I said, "it is looking for you, is not it? And you are not afraid of rescue. You are afraid of what happens if they find you." For a long moment, Isira said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached toward the glass separating us, her long fingers resting gently against the surface, as close to me as the barrier would allow. "You are asking questions that could put you in danger, Daniel Cross," she said, using my full name for the first time, which told me she had been listening far more closely to the guards around her than any of us realized. "I am already in danger," I said. "Every guard in this facility is standing near something command does not fully understand. I would rather understand it too." She studied me for a long time before finally speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I am protecting is not a secret of war," she said. "It is something far more personal and far more dangerous to the ones who would come looking for it. If I tell you, you will understand why I chose this cell over freedom. But you must promise me one thing first." "What is that?" I asked. "Promise me that whatever you learn tonight, you will not report it to your commanders. Not yet. Not until I decide it is safe." I hesitated. Everything in my training told me to refuse, to report this conversation immediately, to follow the protocol I had sworn to uphold. But something in her eyes, something in the quiet desperation behind her request, told me that this was not the request of an enemy trying to manipulate me. This was the request of someone protecting something she loved more than her own life. "I promise," I said. And with those two words, everything changed. She began to speak, slowly at first, then with growing urgency, telling me fragments of Vral culture I had never learned in any military briefing. She spoke of the hive structure that governed her people, of queens treated not as individuals but as sacred vessels whose entire purpose existed for the survival of the collective. She spoke of laws so old and so absolute that no queen had ever defied them, not once, in the entire recorded history of her species. And then, just as she seemed ready to reveal the true reason behind everything, the lights in the corridor outside flickered violently, and an alarm I had never heard before began to sound throughout the facility. Isira's eyes went wide with a fear I had only seen once before, during that first power failure weeks ago. But this time, she did not simply retreat into the corner of her cell. This time, she looked directly at me, her voice trembling with an urgency that cut through everything else in the room. "They have found me," she said. "You must listen carefully because there may not be time to explain everything twice." Whatever she was about to tell me, I understood in that moment that the quiet, careful world I had built around this assignment was about to break apart completely, and there was no going back from whatever came next. The alarm continued to wail through the corridors outside, but inside the containment chamber, Isira's voice remained steady, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, waiting for the day someone would finally be willing to listen. "I did not surrender to your forces because I was defeated," she said. "I surrendered because it was the only way to save what I carry." I did not understand at first. I asked her what she meant, my hand still resting on my weapon out of instinct, though every part of me wanted to lower it and simply listen. "Among my people," she continued, "a queen is never simply an individual. She is a vessel, chosen to carry the future of the hive. When a queen conceives, the clutch she carries does not belong to her. It belongs to the Hegemony Council, to be harvested the moment it reaches maturity, stripped of everything that makes it unique, and shaped into obedient soldiers with no will of their own." She paused, her hand still pressed against the glass, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made the alarm outside feel distant and unimportant. "I am carrying a clutch, Daniel Cross," she said. "My own children, and if the Council finds them before they are born, they will take them exactly as they have taken every clutch before them, exactly as they took me when I was nothing more than an unborn thought inside my own mother." The weight of what she was telling me settled over me slowly, like cold water rising around my chest. I had spent weeks assuming her silence was strategy, her stillness was discipline, her fear was something tied to the war itself. I had never imagined the truth could be this simple and this heartbreaking. "You are pregnant," I said quietly, the word feeling strange and small compared to the enormity of what she had just described. She nodded, her composure cracking just slightly, revealing something underneath that I had never seen from her before, something achingly close to grief. "I learned of a defector before me," she said, "one of our own scholars who fled the hegemony years ago and reached your people in secret. He told stories of how humans fight, not for the collective, not for the hive, but for the individual, for each life, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant to the greater cause. I did not believe him at first. Your species fought a war against mine, with a ferocity that suggested otherwise. We fought to survive," I said, "not because we did not value individual lives, because we valued them enough to protect them." "That is exactly what he told me," she said, "and it is why I chose to come to you rather than continue running from a council that would never stop hunting me until my children were taken and remade into something without choice, without freedom, without a name of their own." I sat down slowly, my legs suddenly unsteady beneath me, trying to process everything she had just revealed. The official story painted her as a captured enemy leader, a prize to be studied, and eventually used as leverage in whatever fragile peace remained between our species. The truth was something else entirely. She was a mother, running not toward freedom for herself, but toward the only chance her unborn children had of ever being allowed to choose their own path in life. "Command does not know this," I said slowly, understanding dawning with each word. "They think you are simply a captured weapon, waiting to be interrogated or exchanged." "That is exactly what I needed them to believe," she said. "If the council among my own people ever learned the truth of my condition, they would stop at nothing to reclaim what they consider rightfully theirs. And if your commanders learned the same truth too early, before trust was built, they may have seen my children as leverage instead of lives worth protecting." The alarm outside grew louder, more insistent, and I could hear the distant sound of boots moving quickly through the corridors above us. Whatever was happening beyond this room, it was escalating fast. That ship in the outer system, I said. It is not looking for a prisoner to reclaim. It is looking for you specifically, because of what you carry. Isira nodded, her expression hardening into something fierce and protective, a look I had not seen from her before, but one that made perfect sense now that I understood what she was truly fighting for. The Council does not send rescue ships for defectors, she said. They send silence ships, vessels meant to eliminate any trace of what they consider a threat to the purity of the hive structure. A queen who defects, carrying a clutch outside their control, is the single greatest threat their entire system of belief cannot survive. If they find me, they will not attempt to bring me home. They will ensure I never speak of this again, and my children will never draw their first breath. The full weight of everything crashed over me at once. The strange behavior among the guards was not asset instability caused by some mysterious psychological effect she had on those around her, as Command believed. It was proximity to a secret so dangerous that even fragments of understanding it seemed to change how people acted, how they carried themselves, how they hesitated outside her door, as if some instinct told them something important was happening that nobody had explained to them. "I need to tell Colonel Whitfield," I said, standing quickly. "If that ship is truly coming for you, the facility needs to know what they are actually defending." Isira reached forward as far as her restraints allowed, her voice sharp with urgency. "Wait," she said. "You must be careful how this is presented. If your commanders believe protecting me means risking a renewed war with the hegemony, they may decide I am not worth the cost. They may choose to hand me over rather than risk further conflict so soon after a ceasefire your people fought so hard to secure." She was right, and I knew it immediately. Command had spent months carefully protecting a fragile peace after 11 brutal years of war. If they believed sheltering Isira meant reigniting that conflict, the calculation could easily tip against her, regardless of the innocent lives involved. "Then what do we do?" I asked. "I cannot simply sit here and watch while a ship arrives to end everything you have sacrificed to protect." She studied me for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, a decision forming behind those dark, intelligent eyes. "There is one thing that might change everything," she said. "Proof. Not simply my word, but something undeniable. Something that shows your commanders the truth clearly enough that they cannot look away from it, no matter how much easier it might be to pretend otherwise." "What kind of proof?" I asked. She hesitated, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw genuine fear return to her features. Not fear of the Council, not fear of the silent ship approaching, but fear of what she was about to ask of me. "I need you to help me reach the medical bay," she said. "There is equipment there capable of confirming what I carry, evidence your scientists would recognize immediately as undeniable. If your commanders see proof of the clutch with their own instruments, rather than simply hearing my words, they may understand what is truly at stake here." The request hit me harder than I expected. She was not asking me to help her escape, not asking me to betray my post for her own freedom. She was asking me to help her prove the truth, even if that truth put her more directly in danger of being discovered by everyone in the facility, not just the approaching ship. "That is a risk," I said quietly. "If I take you out of this chamber, even for a few minutes, there is no guarantee how Command will react." "I understand the risk," she said, "but the alternative is certain. If that ship arrives and finds me still labeled as nothing more than a captured weapon, your commanders may make a decision in minutes that costs my children everything. I would rather take the chance at truth than accept a certainty of silence." I stood there for a long moment, torn between everything I had been trained to do and everything I now understood to be true. My orders were clear. Guard the asset. Report anything unusual. Do not engage beyond basic necessity. But orders had been built on a lie. A story Command believed because nobody had ever bothered to ask the right questions. Because a captured enemy leader was easier to understand as a weapon than as a mother desperately trying to protect her unborn children from a fate worse than death. I made my decision the way most important decisions are made, quickly, and with a certainty that came not from logic, but from something deeper. "I will help you," I said, "but we need to move now, before that ship gets close enough to force everyone's hand." Isira's restraints, as I had suspected weeks earlier, were more symbolic than functional. A quiet touch to a hidden mechanism she guided me toward, something she had clearly studied carefully during her long hours of stillness and observation, released them without triggering the alarm I feared. She stepped forward slowly, taller than me by nearly a head, moving with a grace that made it easy to forget, for just a moment, how much danger we were both stepping into. The corridor outside the containment chamber was in chaos. Guards moved quickly in every direction, shouting instructions I could barely follow over the continued blare of the alarm. Red emergency lighting bathed everything in a harsh, urgent glow. I grabbed Isira's arm gently, guiding her along the path I had memorized during countless shifts walking these same halls, praying we would not run into anyone before reaching the medical bay 2 levels below. We made it as far as the first checkpoint before Marcus Webb stepped into our path, his weapon raised, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something close to betrayal. "Daniel," he said slowly, "what in the world are you doing?" "I need you to trust me," I said, keeping my voice as calm and steady as I could manage, despite my racing heart. "Everything Command believes about her is wrong. She is not a weapon. She never was." Marcus glanced between me and Isira, his weapon wavering slightly as he processed what I was telling him. For a long, tense moment, I genuinely did not know which way this would go. Then, slowly, he lowered his weapon. "I have felt something was wrong since the first week," he admitted quietly. "I just did not know what to do about it." "Help us reach the medical bay," I said. "If we can get proof of what she is protecting, we might be able to change everything before that ship arrives, and forces a decision none of us will be able to undo." Marcus hesitated only a moment longer before nodding, falling into step beside us as we continued through the chaotic corridors, 3 unlikely allies moving through a facility on the edge of a decision that would determine far more than any of us could have imagined just hours earlier. Behind us, the alarm continued to sound, and somewhere far above the underground halls of Site Ashcroft, a Vral silence ship was closing in on its target, with a purpose none of the human guards yet understood, but one that Isira had feared from the very first day I met her. The truth was finally out. Now we simply had to survive long enough for it to matter. We reached the medical bay just as the entire facility shook from an impact somewhere above us. Dust falling from the ceiling panels. Emergency lights flickering with the force of whatever had just struck the outer hull of Site Ashcroft. The silent ship had arrived faster than anyone expected. A young medical officer named Olivia Bennett stood frozen near the diagnostic equipment when we burst through the doors, her eyes going wide at the sight of Isira standing there, tall and unrestrained, clearly no longer confined to her containment chamber. Marcus stepped forward quickly, raising his hands in a calming gesture before she could reach for an alarm switch on the wall. "We need your help," he said, "not your suspicion. There is no time to explain everything, but I promise you, what is happening right now matters more than protocol." Olivia looked between the 3 of us, her training clearly warring with her instincts. Then another impact shook the facility, closer this time, and something in her expression shifted from fear to focus. "Tell me what you need," she said. I explained quickly, as clearly as I could manage with the ground still trembling beneath us. Isira needed confirmation of her condition, something undeniable that could be shown to Colonel Whitfield and anyone else who needed to understand the truth before decisions were made that could not be undone. Olivia moved fast, pulling a portable scanning unit from a nearby cabinet, guiding Isira toward a reinforced medical chair bolted to the floor. "This will only take a few minutes," Olivia said, her hands steady despite the chaos around us. "I need her to stay still." Isira complied, though her eyes kept drifting toward the door, toward the sounds of distant fighting that were growing louder with each passing second. I understood her fear. Somewhere above us, a Vral silence ship had broken through whatever defenses the facility possessed, and its purpose was clear enough now that none of us needed to say it aloud. The scan completed just as the door to the medical bay burst open, and Colonel Whitfield stepped through, flanked by 2 armed guards, her expression a mixture of fury and confusion that I had never seen on her before. "Cross," she said sharply, "what is the meaning of this? You released the asset from containment during an active security breach." "Colonel," I said quickly, before she could give an order neither of us would be able to take back, "she is not a weapon. She never was. She is carrying a clutch, an unborn family that the Hegemony Council wants destroyed because it represents a queen who defected against everything her own people believe in. That ship out there is not coming to rescue her. It is coming to make sure she never speaks again." Colonel Whitfield stared at me, then at Isira, then at the scanning results Olivia was quickly pulling up on a nearby display. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. "Show me," Colonel Whitfield finally said. Olivia turned the display toward her, the readings clear and impossible to misinterpret for anyone with basic medical training. Colonel Whitfield's expression slowly shifted from suspicion to something far more complicated, a recognition of the truth settling over her features as she processed exactly what this meant. "You should have told me this weeks ago," she said quietly, though her voice held less anger now and more something closer to regret. "I could not risk it," Isira said, speaking directly to the colonel for the first time since her capture. "I did not know if your people would see my children as lives worth protecting or as leverage worth using. I chose silence until I found someone willing to listen without judgment first." Another impact rocked the facility, this one close enough to send equipment crashing from nearby shelves. Somewhere down the corridor, the sound of weapons fire echoed, sharp and urgent. "We do not have time for this conversation right now," Marcus said, moving toward the door to check the hallway. "Whatever is breaching this facility, it is getting closer." Colonel Whitfield's hesitation lasted only a few seconds longer before her training took over, her voice snapping into the commanding tone I recognized from our very first meeting. "Cross, Webb, Bennett, get her to the lower evacuation shelter," she said. "I will pull whatever forces we have left and buy you time. This facility was never designed to withstand a direct assault, but I will be damned if we hand over a mother and her unborn children to be executed under my watch." I felt something loosen in my chest at those words, a relief so sudden it nearly buckled my knees. Whatever doubts I had carried about how command would react, Colonel Whitfield had made her choice clearly, and it was the right one. We moved quickly through the corridors, Isira between Marcus and me, Olivia following close behind with a medical kit slung over her shoulder in case it was needed. The facility around us had become a war zone, guards exchanging fire with figures I recognized instantly from years of combat experience, tall Vral soldiers in dark tactical gear, moving with brutal efficiency through the halls of Site Ashcroft. We rounded a corner and nearly collided with a small group of defenders, led by a young corporal named Lily Sanders, her face streaked with dust and sweat, her weapon still smoking from recent use. "They are pushing toward the containment level," she said quickly, falling into step with us as we continued moving. "Whatever they are looking for, they clearly did not find it there." "Because it is not there anymore," I said. "We need to reach the lower shelter. Can you help clear the path?" Lily nodded without hesitation, raising her weapon and moving ahead of our group, her instincts sharp despite the chaos surrounding us. We pressed forward through smoke and flickering emergency lights, every corner a potential threat, every shadow a possible ambush. The Vral soldiers we encountered were disciplined and dangerous, moving with a coordination that spoke of extensive training, but they were also clearly working from limited information, searching methodically rather than knowing exactly where their target had gone. That uncertainty, small as it was, gave us the edge we desperately needed. "We are close," Marcus said as we reached the final stretch of corridor, leading toward the lower shelter, a reinforced section of the facility built to withstand exactly this kind of assault. Then the corridor ahead of us filled with movement, and a tall Vral figure stepped into view, different from the soldiers we had encountered so far. This one moved with an authority that immediately marked them as someone important, someone in command of the assault taking place around us. Ysera stiffened beside me, her breath catching sharply. "That is Commander Threll," she said quietly, her voice tight with tension. "He leads the Council's enforcement division. If he is here personally, they consider this mission critical beyond anything I imagined." Commander Threll's dark eyes locked onto Ysera immediately, recognition and something close to cold satisfaction crossing his features. "Ysera," he said, his voice carrying clearly down the corridor despite the distance between us, "you have caused considerable difficulty for the Council. Surrender now, and perhaps some mercy can be extended." "Mercy," Ysera said, her voice steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. "You do not know the meaning of that word. You came here to end my children before they ever draw breath. There is no mercy in that." Commander Threll's expression did not change, his weapon rising slowly, calmly, as if what he was about to do carried no more weight than any other task assigned to him. "The Council's laws exist for a reason," he said. "A queen who defects threatens the stability of everything we have built. This outcome was decided the moment you chose to run." I stepped forward without fully thinking it through, positioning myself between Ysera and the approaching threat, my weapon raised, my heart pounding but my resolve steady in a way that surprised even me. "She is not alone anymore," I said, "and you are not taking her or her children while I am still standing here." Commander Threll's gaze shifted toward me, a flicker of something almost like curiosity crossing his features before settling back into cold determination. "A human guard, defending a Vral queen," he said. "Your species truly is as strange as the stories claim." "We fight for individuals," I said, echoing the words Ysera had told me only hours earlier, words that suddenly felt more true than anything I had believed about this war. Every single one, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant it might seem to your council. The corridor fell into a tense, dangerous silence, both sides measuring the moment, waiting for whoever moved first. Beside me, Marcus, Lily, and Olivia positioned themselves protectively around Ysera, forming a barrier that made our intentions unmistakably clear. Then, from somewhere behind Commander Threll, the sound of heavy footsteps and shouted orders echoed through the corridor, and Colonel Whitfield's voice cut sharply through the tension, leading a small but determined group of reinforcements who had regrouped from other sections of the facility. "Stand down," she called out, her weapon raised and steady. "This facility, and everyone inside it, is under our protection. You are not welcome here." Commander Threll's eyes narrowed, calculating the shifting odds now stacked against him. For a long, breathless moment, nobody moved. Then, with a sharp gesture, he signaled his remaining forces to retreat, his cold gaze lingering on Ysera one final time before he turned away. "This is not finished," he said, his voice carrying a promise that sent a chill through the corridor. "The Council does not forget, and it does not forgive." He disappeared back into the smoke and shadows, his remaining soldiers following in disciplined retreat, and slowly, the sounds of fighting throughout the facility began to fade, replaced by an uneasy, exhausted silence. We had survived. But as I looked at Ysera, still trembling slightly beside me, one hand resting protectively over her midsection, I understood clearly that this was not truly over. Commander Threll's warning had not been an empty threat, and whatever came next would require more than a single desperate defense to secure a future for the family she had risked everything to protect. The days following the attack on Site Ashcroft moved slower than any of the chaos that had come before them, but the tension never fully disappeared. Repairs began immediately, damaged corridors sealed off, security protocols rewritten from the ground up. Yet none of that mattered as much as the conversation that took place 2 days later, when representatives from Human Command arrived to decide exactly what would happen to Ysera and the unborn family she had risked everything to protect. Colonel Whitfield stood at the head of a long table in the briefing room, the same room where she had first given me my assignment weeks earlier, though everything about that memory felt distant now, almost belonging to a different lifetime. Isira sat across from 3 senior officials, none of whom I recognized, their expressions carefully neutral in the way that people trained in diplomacy learn to master. I stood near the back of the room, not because I had any official role in these proceedings, but because Isira had asked Colonel Whitfield directly that I be allowed to remain present. Nobody had objected. "You understand the position this places us in," one of the officials said, a stern-looking man with gray hair and tired eyes. "Sheltering you risks reigniting a conflict this planet spent 11 years fighting to end. The Council will not simply forget what happened here." "I understand the risk completely," Isira said, her voice calm, despite the weight of the moment. "Which is why I am offering something in return. Not simply my presence, but everything I know about the Council's enforcement structure, their remaining fleet positions, and the internal divisions among the hegemony leadership that your intelligence forces have likely never had access to before." The officials exchanged glances, clearly intrigued despite their careful neutrality. Isira continued, her voice growing steadier with each word, the fear I had seen in her during those first weeks, replaced now by something closer to quiet determination. "I am also offering something else," she said. "My children, when they are born, will not be raised within the hive structure that shaped every queen before me. They will grow knowing choice, knowing individuality, knowing everything your species fought so hard to protect during this war. If the Council ever attempts to reclaim what they believe belongs to them, they will find not simply a defector, but a family who has chosen a different path entirely, one your species helped make possible." The room fell silent for a long moment. Then the gray-haired official leaned back in his chair, studying Isira carefully before speaking again. "That is a significant offer," he said, "and it is not one we can accept lightly. But given everything Colonel Whitfield has already reported, and given the intelligence value you describe, I believe this deserves serious consideration." The negotiations continued for hours after that, details discussed that I was not fully privy to, arrangements made regarding security, oversight, and the long-term protection of both Isira and her unborn children. But the outcome, when it finally arrived, was the one I had hoped for since the moment I first understood the truth she had been protecting. Isira was granted asylum. The following weeks passed, with a strange, cautious calm settling over Site Ashcroft. Security remained tight, given Commander Threll's parting warning, but the atmosphere throughout the facility shifted noticeably. Guards who had once approached the containment level with quiet unease now spoke openly about Isira, some even visiting simply to check on her well-being, an act that would have seemed unthinkable only a month earlier. I found myself spending more time with her than my official duties required, though nobody seemed inclined to stop me. We would talk for hours, about her people, about mine, about the strange, complicated path that had brought us together under circumstances neither of us could have predicted. "You never actually explained why you trusted me first," she said one evening, sitting comfortably now in a private room that had replaced her original containment chamber, one with actual windows overlooking the dry hills above the underground facility. "I did not fully trust you at first," I admitted, "but I trusted what I saw. Fear that did not match the story I had been told, a stillness that felt more like grief than defiance. I could not ignore that, even if I did not understand it yet." She smiled, a small, genuine expression that had become more common in recent weeks, one that still caught me slightly off guard every time I saw it, given how unreadable she had seemed during our earliest encounters. "Among my people," she said, "trust is rarely given so easily, especially not toward someone who was once considered an enemy. Your willingness to listen, before you fully understood what you were listening to, saved far more than you realize." I thought about Commander Threll's warning often during those weeks, the promise that the Council would not simply forget what had happened here. Colonel Whitfield had taken that threat seriously, increasing security measures throughout the facility and coordinating with Fleet Command to ensure additional protection remained nearby in case the Silence Ship, or others like it, attempted a second approach. That second approach never came, not directly. Instead, Weeks later, intelligence reports confirmed that internal divisions within the Hegemony Council had grown significantly following Isra's defection, exactly as she had predicted. The information she provided had exposed fractures in the Council's leadership that other Vral factions, long unhappy with the rigid hive structure governing their society, began exploiting for their own purposes. Commander Threll's forces, it seemed, had far more pressing concerns closer to home than pursuing a single defected queen hidden deep within human territory. Isira gave birth 3 months later, in a quiet medical wing deep within Site Ashcroft, surrounded not by the cold, clinical distance of a council harvesting facility, but by people who had come to care about her well-being through months of shared danger and quiet trust. I stood outside the room during those final hours, pacing the corridor with a nervous energy that surprised me, given that this was not even my own family in the traditional sense. When Olivia finally stepped out to tell me everything had gone well, I felt a relief so complete it nearly brought me to my knees. Isira named her children carefully, deliberately choosing names that honored both her own heritage and the strange, unexpected alliance that had made their survival possible. When she introduced me to them for the first time, her voice carried a warmth I had never heard from her during those early, silent weeks of our first encounters. "This is Daniel," she told them, though they were far too young to understand the words. "He is the reason you will grow up with the chance to choose who you become, rather than having that choice made for you before you ever drew your first breath." I did not know what to say to that. I simply stood there, watching this family that should never have existed according to everything the war had taught me about the Vral hegemony. A family made possible not through grand military strategy or diplomatic maneuvering, but through a single guard, choosing curiosity over blind obedience, choosing to listen rather than simply observe. Colonel Whitfield approached me one evening several weeks later, standing beside me as we both watched Isira through the window of her quarters, her children resting peacefully nearby. "You broke protocol that night," she said, not unkindly. "You should have reported everything the moment you suspected something was wrong." "I know," I said. "And yet," she continued, "if you had followed protocol exactly as written, we likely would have handed her over to whatever fate that silence ship intended, or worse, misunderstood the entire situation until it was too late to matter. Sometimes the right choice and the correct protocol are not the same thing." I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed, as Site Ashcroft slowly transitioned from a secretive containment facility into something closer to a genuine sanctuary, a place where the fragile peace between our species could grow into something more substantial than a simple ceasefire. Isira remained there for nearly a year before eventually relocating, along with her children, to a quieter settlement established specifically for Vral defectors seeking asylum among human territory, a growing community that had slowly begun to form as word spread throughout the hegemony about the choice available to those who wished for something different than the rigid hive structure they had been born into. I visited often during that first year, watching her children grow, watching Isira herself transform from the frightened, silent prisoner I first encountered into someone confident, secure, and deeply protective of the family she had sacrificed everything to save. "They told me to guard the alien queen," I told her once, sitting together during one of those visits, watching her children play nearby with a curiosity and freedom that would have been impossible under the Council's old laws. Nobody mentioned anything about the secret she was protecting. Isira smiled, that same warm expression that still surprised me every time, even after everything we had been through together. "Perhaps that was the point," she said. "Sometimes the most important truths are not something you are told. They are something you have to choose to see for yourself." I thought about all the guards who had come before me, all the strict protocols designed to treat her as nothing more than a dangerous weapon requiring careful containment. None of them had seen what I eventually saw, not because they lacked the ability, but because they had never allowed themselves the simple curiosity of wondering whether the story they had been given was actually true. Humanity fought an 11-year war against the Vral hegemony, A war built on fear, misunderstanding, and the assumption that our differences made genuine trust impossible. But sitting there, watching Asira's children grow up free from the fate that would have awaited them under the old laws, I understood something far more important than any battlefield victory or strategic advantage we had gained during that long, brutal conflict. We were never truly fighting an enemy incapable of understanding what we valued most. We were fighting a system that had never given either side the chance to discover how much we actually had in common. Asira had risked everything, her freedom, her safety, and the future of her unborn children, on the simple hope that somewhere among the humans holding her captive, someone might choose curiosity over fear, and trust over blind obedience to orders that no longer made sense once the full truth was finally understood. I was that someone, entirely by chance, simply because I happened to be standing guard the night the lights flickered and I heard a sound of pure fear coming from behind a wall of reinforced glass. They told me to guard the alien queen. They never mentioned her secret, but in the end, that missing piece of information became the most important assignment of my entire life, one that taught me more about courage, sacrifice, and genuine strength than 11 years of war ever could. And somewhere, deep within a quiet settlement built on the fragile, hopeful foundation of a peace neither species fully trusted yet, a family that should never have existed continued to grow, free, protected, and entirely their own, exactly as their mother had always hoped they would be.